Greetings everyone, Shalom. I'm here at our beautiful spiritual retreat center in the Andes Mountains of southern Chile in the Patagonia region. Anyone interested in coming here to do a retreat with us is more than welcome. We're open to people of all spiritual traditions and backgrounds, and we offer customized, personalized retreats for folks that just want to come here and relax and heal and grow and evolve. I've always found it a little bit difficult to accept the fact that Yeshua was part of the Essenes that came out of Qumran, the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls, in other words. Because his message is so contradictory to so much of what we find in the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that group, which I now know was actually not the mainstream Essene group. They were an offshoot or a breakaway sect of Zadokite priests and their families and whatnot that started that Qumran community and wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And that actually this book, Beyond the Essene Hypothesis by Gabriele Boccaccini, an Italian scholar, excellent book. He essentially proves that there were two groups, and both of them come out of this Enochian Judaism movement. But one group went on to create sort of the more moderate Essene community. The other group was this radical community composed of Zadokite priests and the teacher of righteousness and his followers and all of that. And they started that Qumran community and wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls and everything. But their theology and their belief system, their lifestyle, their practices are quite different from what Yeshua taught, and even from what John the Baptist seems to have taught. And it's located, the Qumran ruins are located pretty far from where Yeshua lived, around Capernaum and the Dead Sea and the Jordan and all of that. And so until I found the research of John ben Daniel, I didn't know that there were a group of caves found at Mount Arbel, which is a hill that overlooks the Dead Sea. Sorry, the Sea of Galilee. So we're talking about two different locations. Let me go back. So yeah, of course the Dead Sea Scrolls were found on the Dead Sea around in Qumran. But Yeshua, of course, was from the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, quite a bit north of where Qumran is, the ruins. And so it never made sense to me that Yeshua and John the Baptist would have come out of that group around the Dead Sea. And anyway, I discovered this research of this author, John ben Daniel. He's done some really great research. And actually, he shows that there was another group of Essenes that were living around the Sea of Galilee. And there's a hill called Mount Arbel that overlooks the Sea of Galilee. And there you can find a series of caves, caverns. And these were dwellings, and probably dwellings of a group of ascetics that lived there. And they were more than likely Essenes. I'm convinced they were a group of Essenes that differed greatly from the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls and that group that settled around Qumran near the Dead Sea. And so also in this book, Beyond the Essene Hypothesis, he essentially proves that there were, in fact, two distinct groups of Essenes, one in Qumran and one that existed more in, Galilee. Also, he says that they were probably had a headquarters in Jerusalem and all of that, which was probably the case. But I believe that Yeshua and John the Baptist, the John the Baptist group, and then Yeshua and his disciples and everything, actually come out of this group from Mount Arbel. And if you see, I've never been to Israel. It's a dream of mine to go and explore, especially the Sea of Galilee and the area around there, and the Jordan River. And now I really want to see Mount Arbel. When you see pictures of it, it looks like it could have been a Tibetan monastery and high in the Himalayas or something. It's a series of cave dwellings and rooms and everything. They even had baptismal pools built into this cavern system, which match very closely what we know about, the Essene practices of daily ritual baptism in the living waters and all of that. Let me just read the conclusion here at the end of this article. This article, by the way, is called "The Cave Dwellers of Mount Arbel." Really good stuff. So the conclusion is, throughout the 1st century BCE and well into the new millennium, the Essenes appear to have lived in two communities on Mount Arbel. One, a mixed married community living in the town of Arbel and farming the fertile land on the plateau above the cliffs of Mount Arbel, and two, an unmarried community of 100 to 120 males living in a large concentration of cave dwellings in the cliff face 2 kilometers to the northeast, which Josephus referred to as the village of the cave of Arbel. It is more than likely that the mixed farming community supplied the other all-male community with their physical needs, which is why no agricultural artifacts have been found in the vicinity of the cave-dwelling community. One of the more important products grown by the farming community, apart from food, was flax. This provided linen clothing for both communities. The Essenes wore white linen robes, we know this, as well as rope for scaling the cliffs to access their caves and for hauling products up and down the cliff face. The convergence of so many devout and educated people in the same area, far from the corrupting influence of political power, had the potential to bring about a blossoming of religious piety, scholarship, and creative literary activity on such a scale as to rival Qumran in originality and intensity. There you go. And so we know that they were growing flax to make linen, to make these white, the white robes that the Essenes wore. We know they always dressed in all white as a symbol of purity. And we know that they had some mikvahs, these baptismal pools, found within the cave dwellings. We know that there were groups of, all male ascetics, monks, basically, that lived far away from society. It matches perfectly the descriptions of Josephus and Philo. This was the contradictory information that always bothered me a bit. We have the descriptions of the Essenes from Josephus and Philo, but those descriptions don't match what we find in the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so that group in Qumran had a lot of important differences. For example, we think that, according to Josephus and what we find in Josephus and Philo, probably, the Essenes were vegetarians. They were against animal sacrifice and against war. They were nonviolent, pacifists. Well, the writings of the Dead Sea Scrolls, they seem to permit, some animal sacrifices, and I don't think they were against war, if you read the war scroll and all of this. And they were just much stricter and more radical in their apocalyptic pronouncements and all of these things. And so we know that Jesus was a Nazarene, Jesus the Nazarene. So he was part of this group called the Nazarenes. But up until now, I wasn't really sure, well, where are the Nazarenes from? Some would say Nazareth, but Nazareth was a tiny little nothing town in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't large enough to support a religious or spiritual community at that time. And so I always wondered, well, we know the Nazarenes lived around the Jordan River. There's some historical documents that say the Nazarenes lived around the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, but I never knew until then exactly where was the headquarters of the Nazarenes. And we know that they were a group of Essenes, similar in many ways, but they had their own thing going on. And so I think we have found the headquarters of the ancient Nazarenes. I believe they lived here at Mount Arbel. And I think Yeshua and John the Baptist were Nazarenes, and that they come out of this group that lived in the cave dwellings at Mount Arbel. They were vegetarians, they were communitarians, and they were pacifists. And so they meet the description of what we find in Philo, what we find in Josephus, and what we know of the Nazarenes and from historical writings. And so I think we finally found this sort of spiritual community out of which John the Baptist and Yeshua arise. And I believe that the Nazarenes lived at Mount Arbel in these cave dwellings overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And that is the original Essene community, the Nazarenes, out of which Yeshua and John the Baptist come, and that they were completely separate from this breakaway sect, the authors of the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran. So we finally have evidence that probably the Nazarenes did have their headquarters around the Sea of Galilee in Mount Arbel.